Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia Adventure Food. We're on to episode number 73 today, and we were supposed to have an interview with Laurie Pottiger from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I say we were supposed to be speaking with Laurie. In fact, I did have a great conversation with her. She was just as charming as I'm sure you'd imagine, but I'm afraid I have to fess up to a bit of a technical glitch on my part. Last week, for reasons best known to nerds and geeks, my 6-month-old Apple Mac decided that it had had enough of me and quit on the job. I just finished putting together last week's show. In fact, I'd done it a day or so early, luckily, and everything went blah. I have no idea what the technical term for going blah is, but I guess that many of you will recognise the term from your own lives with computers. After 3 days of calls, several well-meaning young men and women from Apple, and tons of frustration on my part, I was informed that the only way forward was to wipe the machine clean and reinstall it as if it were brand new. Now, I know I'm wrong here. I don't actively back up my Apple, though my podcasts and writing files are in the cloud, wherever that is, so I was almost back to square one. Reinstalling Skype and using a new microphone shouldn't have been too much of an issue, but I failed to set the sound settings on Skype, instead believing that setting the microphone would do the job. Schoolboy error on my part. In the recording, Laurie and I sound like a couple of zombies trying to eat our microphones, so a completely new conversation with Laurie will be on in a couple of weeks' time. The good news from this debacle is that once I'd resolved my settings, I was able to record a fantastic interview with Linn, or Guthook. Ryan will be on in a minute. I also had a nice chat with Dr. Linn in one of our last dock spots. Linn had a few things to say on food and nutrition while hiking. Yes, I know that Snickers and peanut butter are the kind of bacon of trail food, but listen to Linn and you'll think more carefully about when you eat those things. And I'm on a roll. Another completely accidental segue. I should be good at this by the time I get to episode number 500. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my AirPad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruit, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Ooh, yummy. Now, let's listen to Linn's adventures. And if his trail name is a little bit familiar, you're going to find out that there is a very good reason for that. Okay, we've got a guest on today, Linn, named Guthook. There's clearly something of a clue in your trail name, Ryan, but I'm going to return to that soon. So, hi, how are you?
Good morning. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I watched the first half of the Super Bowl last night, and that was about all I needed.
Oh, dear me. That was a great game, though. I watched it. It was absolutely terrific. So you're obviously a hiker. You've got some quite considerable hiking experience. And tell us about your hiking experience and how you worked in and around hiking after you left college.
Well, so I got into hiking when I was in high school because one of my teachers organized the outing club at my high school, and
okay.
I'm not sure exactly where I went from hating the outdoors, as I was in middle school or something.
Yeah, traditional teenage mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Somewhere at the end of high school and beginning of college, I just couldn't get enough of backpacking in general. So I started leading trips for my college outing club. I took a semester at Knowles doing all kinds of wilderness travel stuff for about 3 months in Wyoming and Utah. And then after college, I immediately after, I went and hiked the Appalachian Trail.
As you do.
And then, as you do, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why not when you have nothing else that you can think of to do?
Darn right.
And a few years later, hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. And between those two, and for a few years afterwards, I worked at various Appalachian Mountain Club, Green Mountain Club.
Oh, right.
I became a Knowles instructor, and worked at a few random like camps and other outdoor recreation / education places.
Yeah, so you really got it. You really got into it then. So what was it about hiking that actually changed your mindset? Was it something about being in the outdoors, or how it made you feel? Because it's amazing to go from somebody who hates the outdoors to somebody who loves the outdoors so much he works in it. What was it about it?
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain, but a lot of junior high school, college for me was about not really fitting in with the majority of people that that were there, and so I guess the folks that I would go hiking with at in that early time were people that I got along with well, and then also when I wasn't hiking with people, when it was just me alone in the woods, it's hard to describe exactly the peace of mind that comes with being out there in the wilderness, or climbing a mountain.
You just feel it. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
It is just something it does to you. And what you say, if you didn't fit in at school, then most hikers I met were very accepting people, and they, you pitch up at a shelter, and you've done the same as they've done to get there. So there's an instant, a mutual reaction to each other.
Yeah, it's kind of like its own little society.
Yeah.
And there's that peace of mind, especially also that time at school is I was never able to handle the anxiety of a lot of the life at school and all that stuff. And the times when my mind was most at ease were when I was out hiking. So just felt like it was where I was meant to be.
So you thought you compound it by going on the AT, which is quite a thing. How was that experience for you, and what did you take from the AT?
Oh man, it was fantastic. So much, took so much from it. It's again, I probably can't even list for you all the ways in that it kind of shaped my future life. I mean, just from the beginning, it was this incredible journey that, day one, I met someone who is now like one of my best friends.
Yeah.
And day 3, the two of us met another one of our best friends. And, that was almost 11 years ago. And they're still some of my best friends in the world. And that's like a huge thing right there, just having that community. But then, seeing what I could do, all that hiking that is so unlike anything that you could do aside from through hiking. I wasn't very, I didn't do a lot of alone hiking on the Appalachian Trail, although I actually did probably more than I did on the Pacific Crest Trail.
You can if you choose to, though, can't you? You don't, you can pick and choose your silences. Yeah. You can pick and choose your company anytime you like. And people think it's so crowded, and it is pretty crowded. I guess this, in March and April, it's going to be really darn crowded. But there are days, even though I went in the middle of a bubble, it was easy to have some alone time as much as you wanted, really.
It's true. Yeah. And I mean, it's a little easier when you're, I left Springer pretty early and was done on Katahdin also very early. So there really weren't a lot of other northbound through hikers around when I was.
When did you start then?
February 24th.
Oh my gosh. Actually, funny enough, our other podcast, Returning to Katahdin, that we're doing, this guy, Bruce, who we're following, he starts on February 24th this year as well. And I bet you finished earlier than he's got to finish, though. When did you actually finish?
June 30th.
Oh my God, June! I wasn't even halfway by June. I went in March. I wasn't even running halfway. Oh, dude. Did you have time to smell the roses?
Oh yeah,
All right.
there was lots
Good.
of rose smelling. I mean, I think anybody who poo-poos someone else's hiking style, it usually is something about like, if someone says you can't be enjoying yourself like that,
Yeah,
what they really mean is I wouldn't enjoy myself doing the same thing
Exactly
because
right.
that's not how I hike.
Exactly correct. Yeah.
No, I had a wonderful time. And it's funny. I was thinking this the other day. I can rattle off the dates that I left Springer, that I got to Katahdin, that I got to Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
Like those days are as ingrained in my memory as my own birthday. It's kind of a thing that happens on that trail.
Yeah.
And especially because that was, the first one. Like I actually can't remember the exact dates from my Pacific Crest Trail hike.
Oh, that is interesting. How different did you find doing the Pacific Crest Trail then?
It was very different, I think. Again, I usually will avoid. I try not to compare them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's an important thing to me too. Is it's apples and oranges. So the one of the reasons is that, again, the Appalachian Trail was my first through hike. The Pacific Crest Trail, I had done a bunch of things in between. So you're a totally different person and you're getting different things out of it.
Of course.
Yeah. I actually really enjoyed the solitude in some places on the PCT, but I also made a lot of good friends.
Yeah.
And, some parts I really liked a lot more, some parts I disliked. But in the end, it was kind of, with both of them, it's kind of a growing experience in your life. And who's to say one is better than the other? It's just they're very different.
Yeah, I think timing in life is so important anyway. Sometimes people are not in the position in the time of their life to do a certain hike. And I'm sure if I had done the hike, the AT, when I was 30, I would have taken so much less from it, or more from it perhaps. I would have taken something different from it to doing it as I did when I was 61. So I think, it all depends on where you are, as you say, at that time. Now, while we're still on the AT, before we move on to the PCT, and then the other reason I wanted to talk to you, when we spoke about doing this interview, you told me that there is more to Baxter State Park than through hikers know. And what do you mean by that?
Oh, man. Well, so in the past few years, I've begun exploring Baxter State Park as someone who is no longer a thru hiker, but someone who has been a thru hiker.
Yeah.
And so the Appalachian Trail in Baxter State Park is 14 miles long. There are 215 or so miles of trail in Baxter State
Park.
And there's, yeah. And those trails go to probably a dozen different mountains. I can't remember the exact number, but I looked this up a couple of years ago. There are close to like 60 different lakes in the park.
Wow.
And it goes on for many, many miles north of Katahdin. It really is just a tremendously special place.
So do you live up there now?
I live in Portland, Maine, it's still about a 4-hour drive.
All right. So do you still go to the park quite a bit though?
Yeah. In fact, I actually just signed up with a group of friends to go there at the end of this month in February and do a winter climb of Katahdin, which I haven't done before.
Oh gosh.
I'm usually not that interested in that kind of peak bagging, but the cross-country skiing into the Roaring Brook and Chimney Pond campgrounds, and then staying at a bunkhouse there, a cabin, with wood stove for heat, and
cool.
Being completely out of contact with the outside world for 5 days. That's something I really love about that place.
I'm sure. Now, as you mentioned, you went on to hike the PCT, and when you're on the PCT, I know that you met somebody quite important to your future. Tell us about meeting Paul, your future business partner.
Yeah, it's funny. Usually when you hear someone say that they met someone important to their future on a thru hike, it's their wife or husband. But
exactly. He's neither.
I would have. Yeah, I think in both cases, I went onto those trails thinking like, all right, this is it. That's what I'm going to find. Well, that wasn't the case, but worked out pretty well instead, which is I met Paul, whose trail name was Tangent,
All right.
and I met him in Northern California. We didn't really begin hiking together solidly until Washington. So we hiked the last month, give or take, together.
All right.
And he's let's see, he's about 10 years older than me, maybe a little more. So he already had a career behind him, right, and had some ideas for what he was doing next in life.
Yeah.
But one of the things he was doing was writing a guidebook to the Pacific Crest Trail. And that year on the PCT, there were so many options for guidebooks, and none of them were perfect. None of them had everything that we wanted, but some of them had better details than than other ones. So Paul was putting together one that was a simple, but kind of a data book with more information.
Absolutely.
And we would talk pretty frequently about what was good about certain guidebooks, what was not as good about certain other ones, and the idea of making guidebooks for other hiking trails, because I had all these ideas for, trails that were not too well known in my area up in New England and just didn't have great guidebook information. So I thought that might be something I wanted to do with my life later, was write guidebooks for these obscure trails.
So you kind of met a kindred spirit in many ways when it came to the sort of thing you're talking about now.
Yeah, someone who likes to nerd out on how to get info about trails to people.
So I think we're now going to say we're now going to talk about why you are actually called Guthook, and then we're going to move on to what that means. So why were you given the name Guthook?
Well, I actually got it when I was in college before hiking the Appalachian Trail.
All right.
It was one of those college outing club trips, and a few of us ended up at a hunting and fishing store for some reason or another.
Uh-huh.
And we're looking at all the brutal implements for hunting and fishing and decided that we needed some intimidating names for when we were out on the trail. So there's along with me, there was also Bone Saw and Meat Cleaver. I don't think either of them go by that anymore. I do still keep in touch with Bone Saw. He's a high school Latin teacher, actually. So I don't think his students call him that. I hope they know about it, though.
I hope they do, and I hope they know about it now. I'll
ask them about it.
So you became Guthook, and your conversation with Paul, who was Tangent, led to what? Mm-hmm. What did you create between you?
Yeah, so in the end, it was actually several months after we both had gotten home from the Pacific Crest Trail.
Uh-huh.
And I was still trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do with my life. Paul had some ideas already. But one of the things that he had pointed out when we were on the trail, this is 2010.
Sure.
The iPhone had only been on the market for
3 years.
About 3 years.
Yeah, 2007.
And not many people, there weren't too many people with them, especially out on the trail. So we saw Paul had one. I saw maybe 2 people with Android phones back then.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was flip phones and not much else.
Happy days. Flip phones.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Such a different world. It's incredible.
Totally.
I didn't even have a cell phone when I was on the Appalachian Trail.
Right.
You pay phones. Imagine that.
So did the two of you see the potential then, specifically with the iPhone, or were you generally talking about smartphones?
He kind of had came up with he figured out the potential of it. He was the one that was more forward looking than me. I wasn't really that interested in working on computers, even though that's what I had been when I was in middle school, back when I hated being outdoors.
You nerd. You nerd you.
Yeah, exactly. I still claim to be one. I do spend a lot of time on the computer.
Yeah.
So, I was back home in Maine visiting my parents, and one of my mom's coworkers and friends who went from working at the school where my mom works to working for Apple. And she was like, Ryan, remember when you were, when you were into computers and programming and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't actually do any programming before, but she was like, you really got to you got to make an app. That was back in the days when everything was just, you need an app for, you know, nobody really had any ideas of what to make, or some people did, but you needed to make an app. And finally, after all this time, she'd been telling me this for a couple of years. After all this time, I was finally like, well, I don't have anything better going on. I was working a soulless temp job doing data entry at a mapping company, which I won't bore you with the details of, but it was pretty mind numbing. And I didn't have any plans for, you know, my next seasonal job in the outdoor world. So
that's time. Hang on, but that's timing again, isn't it? Both of two of you were in a position to be considering a new career direction. You met, and this is what timing's about. I mean, that's amazing to me. In fact, let's face it, it could have been called Tangents, couldn't it, instead of Guthooks? Because he was called Tangents. So you did well there.
The reason we went with my trail name was because I was writing a hiking blog before then, thinking that I wanted to be, you know, some kind of outdoor travel writer before I realized how much work that was and how much I didn't really enjoy it as much, the writing part. So we figured we'd put my name on the app just to have some you know, through hiker cred, and things kind of spiraled out from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've definitely become, probably accidentally, and I suspect largely anonymously, kind of ubiquitous in trail circles. So how did that come about? Because it's all about distribution, isn't it? And getting out there, getting in front of people. And Androids outsell Apples by about, I think, 5-1, don't they? So which platforms did you use? Did you use both platforms straight away, or did you start with Apple?
Oh, everything was kind of, I think you're basically right about the accidentally and anonymously. Everything was just, we kind of fell into it as we went.
Right.
I taught myself how to program for iPhones because I had a Mac computer and figured I would get an iPhone. Yeah. So,
by the way, hang on. I must interrupt you there. The reason I'm interrupting you is to tell the listeners that Ryan gave me the absolute best excuse for cutting short an interview. He said, I may have to jump off the line because Apple may call me. So I think that is about as cool as it gets. So you're welcome.
Technical things. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Actually, I have to take a look at this phone just for a second to see if anything has come in.
That is so cool. There you go. We'll keep it in.
No news from Apple. Thank goodness.
Good.
It's been a wild ride. Yeah, so everything has been kind of learning as we went along. We started out with the guide for the Pacific Crest Trail in 2012.
All right.
And we were frantically getting the info for it together from all the notes that Paul had taken on his hike.
Okay.
And yeah, like we released the first section of that app, the Southern California section, like right as people were beginning the trail. And we were like scrambling to get the next section out before they got onto the trail. And it was a crazy learning experience. And then
of course,
we didn't think people were actually going to use it that much. We thought it was just going to be like a side project for us while we were working at our other jobs that we would somehow find. And all of a sudden, you know, people are emailing us saying like, hey, are you going to do this for this other trail? Are you going to put this feature in there? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And we were just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'd imagine. What's the moment that it happens when you turn this smart idea into a business? Because if that was just a project, you had other jobs as well. You have to make that commitment one day, don't you, to switch off the other jobs and switch onto the business. So when did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was also mostly an accident and good luck and good timing, which was I was never planning on making an app for the Appalachian Trail, but that friend of mine that I met on Springer Mountain, she was, she had just ended a long relationship and had ended a long-term job. And so she was in a prime position for doing a thru hike, if nothing else.
Sure.
So she just said, hey, I'm planning on hiking, the southern part of the Appalachian Trail. You want me to bring a GPS and note-taking things and I was like, well, yeah, why not? Let's see if anything comes of this. And so once the Appalachian Trail was in our list of apps, I think it was our third or fourth after the Pacific Crest Trail and the John Muir Trail. Yeah, so third. But yeah, so I
business.
kind of, all of a sudden, it turns out there are a lot of people hiking the Appalachian Trail or who want to hike the Appalachian Trail. So it became somewhat popular then. We didn't become a full-fledged business until maybe 2015. So a few years afterwards.
Right. And how many trails are you now covering then?
I can't even count them all at this point.
Really?
We work with a bunch of different trail organizations. So let's see, we've got pretty much all of the major through hiking trails in the U.S., the Continental Divide Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Appalachian Trail, Colorado Trail, Arizona Trail, John Muir Trail, the Long Trail, the Florida Trail. It goes on. One of my pet projects has been guides for Baxter State Park and the White Mountains in New Hampshire.
I bet,
yeah, which is really an excuse to get out and hike more often around home.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's helpful.
And how accurate are the numbers? Do you have a feel for how accurate they are, or how tested have they been?
Oh, they've been pretty well tested. This accuracy when dealing with GPSs and data sets for long trails, I have come to appreciate the nuances of that a lot more as I've been working with a lot of GPS data.
Sure.
But I can say that the data especially for the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail and, most of our bigger ones is very spot on as far as, so there's two different parts of the accuracy for GPS info, which is there's the horizontal, so along the ground.
That's right.
And then there's the vertical, which is your elevation.
Yeah.
But GPSs tend to not have very good elevation accuracy.
Okay.
So we run to get our elevation profiles, we run all of our trail info through some pretty gigantic databases of geospatial data from the USGS, from various NASA puts out a lot of it, and then various agencies throughout the world, depending on where the trail is coming from. So probably more details than you need, but
well, no, you know what? Ironically, I mentioned this on an episode I've just recorded on our other show about Guthook. It wasn't about Guthooks, but one of the things that my hiker was taking was a Guthooks app, and it's that little blue dot and its position on the mountain. And in this way, you're going up the mountain, you think, oh my God, how far have I got to go? You look at your Guthooks, you're near the top. It is a wonderful moment when you see that little blue dot flashing away to the top. Of course, on the other side is when you've still got miles to go. It's a nightmare to see the little blue dot. It doesn't ever appear to be moving. But yeah, that was absolutely wonderful. So how do you update your guides, and what is the process of updating them? Do you now hire people to go and hike, or people just volunteer to go and hike?
Oh, man. Yeah, it depends a lot on the specific trail that we're working on. So it ranges from, one of us going out and hiking a section, which is happening less and less because it's a kind of inefficient use of our time. And
of course.
Kind of at some point it got to the point where I was thinking too much about work while I was hiking, which is, you don't want to be thinking about work when you're hiking.
Good point. Good.
So a lot of how we get our info is through partnerships with regional trail clubs.
All right.
So a lot of our apps, like the Arizona Trail app, the Continental Divide Trail app, and the Ice Age Trail, we partner with the agencies that maintain those trails, and so we make an app for them. And they send us all the info that they keep info on their trails anyway. So
cool.
That's a really great one because we can basically provide a service for a really great nonprofit organization like any of the ones that maintain those trails.
Sure.
And at the same time, we're, they're helping us a little bit by sending us the info, and we're helping them a little bit by giving them some kickbacks from app sales,
Of course.
and providing that service for people that are hiking on their trail.
Absolutely.
And aside from the trail organizations that we work with, we work with a few guidebook writers here and there, and with a few contracted hikers that we work with.
You're going to be getting job applications. Ryan, trust me, you're going to be getting job applications. What a job to do, eh? Go and hike this trail to update the thing. Now, I can see so much. I would think, I don't know whether you have considered this much, I can see so much opportunity for you guys with, the increasing number of hikers heading out into the wilderness. Are you thinking about entering the market of GPS location and notification, like Spot or Garmin, or is that something not in your future?
Ooh, so we have been planning on something like that. One of the tricks is that a Spot or a InReach, those receive information by satellite. That's what most GPSs do, and they also send information by satellite. But an iPhone or an Android smartphone, they can receive information by satellite with the GPS. They can't send it by satellite unless you have basically the Garmin or the connected tool, which there's more of those coming out. But one of the ideas that we want to do for a future update is to have you be able to set a list of people who are able to see where you are, and then the app would send a breadcrumb trail
nice.
in the background, so that you could say, I want my family to be able to see where I am.
Nice.
So then they could then take a look at the app or at some website at some point, and they would just see like, oh, here's where you were on, April 1st at this morning, and then he checked in here that afternoon. He's still moving.
Yeah, it's the still moving thing that's important. Stuff. Yeah, if you're there for 2 or 3 days, they need to start worrying. And with all this,
right?
And this is, and I know some people bemoan this, but with the increasing level of sophistication in technology, do you think it's becoming intrusive in the hiking world, or is there a balance that can be achieved?
I hope there's a balance that can be achieved. I do agree that the level of technology that is available, in a portable way that can actually function while you're in the wilderness, is certainly changing a lot of the character of trails and wilderness, and in some ways for good, in some ways maybe less good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my goal from the very beginning was to try and make our app as unobtrusive as possible.
Sure.
I'm probably never going to make something where, it's people are like holding up their phone and looking through that to get the so-called augmented reality. But I don't want any augmentation when I'm on top of Guthook.
You can play Pokemon on it, can't you? Pokemon Go on the iPhone. On the Appalachian Trail.
So that's kind of one of my guiding principles is if I have any, I am conflicted about, people being on the trail with technology that makes things easier for them. But part of the way I can justify that to myself is that we weren't the first ones to bring that ability to people, and we weren't really the ones responsible for bringing the iPhone and the Android out to the wilderness either, because those were, Google and Apple did that, and we're just using the tool that
it's there anyway. You're absolutely right. That everyone's got them, if only for a camera. So, why not? Frankly, as far as I can see, I totally agree. And thinking of that, what do you think Guthooks is going to look like in 5 years' time, or is the breadcrumbs the limit of your vision at the moment, or do you have visions beyond that?
Oh, we do have all kinds of visions going into the future. There's a constant stream of ideas that we have that we can only get to so quickly.
Sure.
But one of the biggest things for me is just briefly going back to the responsibilities of having this technology in the backcountry.
Sure.
But we do some of those partnerships with the trail organization. And I personally am also very somewhat to very involved with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and trying to work with them on ways to make the trail feel more wild, even as it's becoming more popular. And, you know, the link between the outside world and the trail is getting more, you know, closer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, part of what I want to do with our apps and that we're working towards is to basically ways to get good information to the hikers in a way that will reach them better. So a lot of how let me back up a second. You're aware of things like the controversy with Baxter State Park and you know, the partying on the summit.
Of course. Yeah.
So the way that the Appalachian Trail Conservancy deals with things like that is it's very difficult and not always successful to try and police things along a long distance trail.
Sure.
So what the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and a lot of the member clubs like the Green Mountain Club, where I learned a lot of the trail management stuff that I know of.
Yeah.
The best option is just to get better information and educate the hikers. So my goal is, hopefully
you can incorporate that. You can incorporate that within your app, couldn't you?
Yeah, and so I've been working with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to put that info in there. And then the next step for me is to have that info be more, you know, have it get to the people in a way that is more effective. So to put it in their face and like find a way to make sure that they actually know this information and know what's right and know what's at stake. So there's all kinds of little things like that.
Sure.
It is pretty remarkable how much work goes into the actual creation and protection and maintenance of these trails. So I want to do everything I can to, you know, to help those folks in the ways that I can.
Cool. So the last question really is, how do people, if they don't know, access Guthooks? Is it entirely through apps on the smartphones? Yeah.
Smartphones and tablets. We sell through the App Store and the Play Store.
Yeah.
And right now, the iPhone version, the App Store, it's all one app called Guthook Guides.
Uh-huh.
And you get in there, and then you can pay for the different trails that you want to access in the app.
Nice.
The Android version is several different apps at this point. We might be combining them into one sometime in the future. Not 100% certain when, but we do like to have everything be kind of together. It makes it easier for people to go from one to the other.
Sure.
Or find them.
Well, I'm delighted that Apple chose not to interrupt us and that we had a chance to speak with you about Guthooks. Obviously, I didn't introduce why you were called Guthooks until a little way through the conversation, and I really appreciate you giving us the time to talk us through Guthooks, and thank you for the contribution you made to the trail, because I tell you, that little blue dot is a very reassuring thing to see. Let me tell you.
Well, I'm glad that you saw it, but also that you got to see the trail with it. So that is the most important part after all.
Indeed it is. Well, thanks very much to talk to us, Ryan, and hopefully we'll speak soon.
Yeah, you too. It's wonderful talking to you.
Cheers. Bye. I thought Ryan had such a great attitude to hiking and the right way to do things. He's developing his company carefully and given a lot of thought to the future. As I mentioned, I used Guthooks and found it to be really helpful in knowing where I was. I managed to get myself lost from time to time, but Guthooks soon got me back on track. Once again, apologies to Laurie for messing up the tech, but if you'd like your Appalachian Trail Conservancy itch scratched, you should tune in to this coming week's Returning to Katahdin, when I'll be speaking with Suzanne Dixon, President and CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. She has a clear-eyed vision for the trail and ATC's role in that vision. I can't recommend the show highly enough. Back to Ryan for a second. Once he and I had finished our chat, we talked on for another 20 minutes, and he shared a terrific little story of something that had happened to him. Luckily, I was still recording, so with his permission, I thought I'd add this little gem.
I was out for a week on the Pacific Crest Trail a couple summers ago.
Right.
It was the first time I'd been on it in years, and I was hiking with a bunch of my Appalachian Trail buddies, and we were going south. while all the thru hikers were going north. And so I didn't really stop to talk to too many of them because, when the thru hikers get at the north end of the trail, they kind of just keep going. They don't really talk to, weekenders like us.
Yeah.
So at one point at the end of a day, I come across this older fellow who's sitting there looking at his phone. He's got one earbud in his ear, and he's just having himself a good time. And and he looks up and he says, "Oh, hey, Guthook says that there's a campsite about a quarter mile that way. Is that right?" and I said, "Well, yeah, I think so. I think I remember seeing that." And he goes, "Cool. Are you familiar with Guthook?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I am."
Brilliant.
And I know him quite well. He's
How
right
cool
here.
is that?
And oh man, I think I made that guy's day. It was so funny. Like,
bet you did.
Are you familiar with Guthook? I certainly am.
I thought that was hilarious. It's odd though, isn't it? Many people know that Zach Davis is the owner of the Trek and that Odie does the Hiker Yearbook. But I wonder how many people would have associated Ryan Linn with Guthooks. Hope that you enjoyed how we revealed his story. He was such a nice bloke and really thoughtful about his product. I really enjoyed chatting with him. Talking about people I enjoy chatting with, here is Dr. Linn in one of our last doc spots. This week, it's all about the food and the nutrition. And we're back on with Dr. Linn. Hi, Linn. How are you?
Great. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you. And today we are going to talk about hiker nutrition, or in the case of most people on the trail, lack of hiker nutrition. So I know you've got a few thoughts about this. What are the important things to know about in terms of nutrition on the trail?
I've always liked to think about my nutrition on the trail as actually part of my gear, because if you think about it, it's helping you get to that next step, that next couple of miles, or the next shelter, or the end of the trail. Just like your boots and your pack and your tent, your food is going to help you get to that goal that you want. So rather than saying, "Wow, this is so great, I can eat as much as I want because I'm going to lose all this weight," you say, "Okay, well, I can." It's the same thing with pack weight. You really want to say, "Okay, is this really going to be beneficial for me? Is this, extra knife, extra Swiss Army knife going to be beneficial? Or, do I really need 2 flashlights when I only really need one at a time?" You have to think of, in my opinion, and this one is really this is my opinion type of episode, because there's so many different ways of doing this.
Is this how you consider your own food, though?
Yes, I do. And granted, I have not done a long distance through hike. My hikes are mostly day hikes, but they are all day, and they do require a lot of energy. So I sit there and I look at my food and say, okay, how is this going to benefit me on the trail?
Right.
And is it going to stay in one piece on the trail, or am I going to be sitting there eating crumbs? Is it going to stay fresh? And is it going to give me the energy that I need to make it back to my car?
So how does food give you energy? What do you need to get that energy? What mix of stuff do you need to take?
There are 3 basic components to the food that we eat: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And then there's the vitamins and minerals that are mixed in with that.
Sure.
But carbohydrates are your starches: breads, pasta, rice, potatoes, your sugars. And those give you energy for the short run. That's your startup fuel, and the fuel that will take you through the first maybe 30 to 60 minutes of some sort of continuous activity. The next group is your fats, and your fats are basically what it is: butter, cheese. What's fat that we can use on the trail? Nuts.
Peanut butter is fat,
oil.
Surely.
Peanut butter, yes, peanut butter. Very good source of fat. And that is energy that is used for the long haul. For people who don't quite, who might need more of a visual, if you think of somebody who is overweight, they have, quote unquote, they are fat.
Hang on. I am thinking to myself right now. Okay.
Okay. And I'm sorry if I'm not sounding politically correct, but if somebody is overweight, they are fat. They are fat because they have fat stored in their body.
Yeah.
And if they then start exercising more or burning more, using more energy than they take in, that fat is going to become less and less because that fat in their body is going to be utilized for energy.
Right.
That's why we are able to store fat so that we can use it later.
What happens to the carbs then? When you take in carbs?
So you're taking in the carbs are utilized first. And then when they're burned up, then the fats are utilized. So let's say you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah.
The jelly is sugar and fruit, and that's a carb. And the bread is also a carb. The peanut butter is the fat. So your body will utilize the jelly and the bread first, and then the peanut butter will be utilized later on several hours down the line, which is why peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a Snickers bar are, believe it or not, they sound kind of like junk food, but they're great food for long distance hiking because they will carry you the long distance. And they'll keep your body going in optimal condition.
Toward the end of my hike, I was eating 6 Snickers bars a day. Just so much. I just could not get enough of them. One of those things. It became almost an obsession for me.
Well, and that's a little bit of an interesting twist because you might think that, in the beginning, you might have been able to, or you might have needed only maybe 2 Snickers bars or something. But towards the end, you said you needed 6. Now, there's a theory out there about really long distance hiking, several months at a time, that alters the enzyme production in the intestines, so that the intestines are not as well able to absorb the nutrients. So you feel like you actually need to eat more, and you're not getting as much out of it. And that's something that's very important for the very long distance hikers to think about. I'm not talking about people going out for a day or even for a week or maybe even for 2 weeks, but these are the AT people, the PCT people, the Continental Divide Trail, where you're out there for months on end. The enzymes get deficient because you're deficient in things like vitamins and minerals.
Right.
Let's see. And so when you're deficient in those enzymes, they can't break down the foods and utilize them. It just kind of passes through you.
Okay. What are the other options, food options other than the Snickers if you want to be try to be slightly more healthy?
So slightly more healthy, okay, if you think about it, Snickers is sugar and peanuts and some sort of oil that brings it all together. So basically deconstruct that and then take those components and make something else out of it. Another thing that's a little healthier, again, this is a personal preference, are the Kind bars, the brand name Kind that's out there. They have nuts. They're sweetened not just with sugar or high fructose corn syrup. They're sweetened with more natural things like honey, maple syrup. Some of them use brown rice syrup. They also have some dried fruits in them. So personally, I like those better, more so than, when you're hiking in 90-degree weather, Snickers bars can melt. and
they never lasted long. No, they never lasted long enough for me. They never melted for me. As soon as I had them, I ate them.
So with the Kind bars, it's a little less likely that you're going to have to be licking the wrapper with your tongue. They're just a little bit easier. Again, this is why I think of it as part of the gear. Okay, what's going to be easiest for me? What's going to make as little mess as possible that I can, get on the trail? We should not forget the protein category because that's really important at the end of the day. That should be your primary meal is your protein meal should be at the end of the day because that will help to rebuild and repair your muscles. The muscles that you've utilized all day long, you've given them a lot of work and they need now to rest and repair. So at the end of the day, make sure that your dinner is something that has a decent amount of protein in it.
That's interesting. I'll tell you why I think that's interesting. When I was away, one of the women with whom I hiked, she and I gave each other a hard time the whole time. And she told me that I shouldn't eat protein bars during the day. I should wait till later in the evening, because what it does is just pass right through you and give you wind. And I must confess it did do that. So I hadn't realized how important it was to specifically eat protein at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you're eating protein at the beginning of the day, oftentimes, again, your body is working hard, moving the arms and the legs, so it doesn't have that kind of an energy to shunt to the stomach and the intestines in order to metabolize it. So it's just going to pass right through you, and you're not going to get the nutritional benefit of the protein. Whereas when you're at rest in the evening, it's a lot easier for your organ systems to really shunt the blood and the energy to metabolize the protein that you're eating during the evening time.
Right. So what about times to eat? Because I know that if I eat late at night, particularly proteins, actually particularly meats, I have a real trouble sleeping. Does the time of your food make much difference?
I think that might be an individual type of an issue. I have not really heard that or seen that in my research so much regarding thru hikers. I know in my practice, oftentimes I will tell my patients, don't eat a big dinner late at night, because that can keep you up for a number of different reasons, like reflux disease and excessive amounts of sugar churning through your body late at night.
Sure.
And alcohol, the same thing. But I'm not sure about hikers. And I think hikers in general, they generally tend to eat right around sunset, which I guess can be pretty late in the day, in late June, early July. So I don't think my professional opinion, I don't think it's as much of an issue because of the timing of the hiker's daily routine.
Okay. All right. So how about... We did talk about, remember this wilderness-acquired diarrhea before some time ago now, and you said that, and in your notes it says that may also be due to lack of intestinal enzymes. So how do you actually combat this?
One of the ways that has been evaluated is with certain types of supplements that you can take on the trail.
Right.
Clearly, you can't get fresh fruits and vegetables when you're long-distance hiking unless you're in a town or unless you've got some great trail magic. And that's where you're going to get your water-soluble vitamins, your minerals, and those vitamins and minerals really help to keep your intestinal enzymes at top performance. So using some sort of a vitamin supplement would be very effective. Again, because your body is having difficulty possibly absorbing things, I would recommend not to take a vitamin pill, because that may not be digested well, but instead maybe take something that's chewable, where you're already digesting it starting in the mouth, or a vitamin drink of, not like a supplement, vitamin powder that you can put into a water or something like that. It's already being broken down, so it will absorb much better. You
mentioned probiotics. I mean, I know that I see these around. You recommend Align. That is expensive as hell, isn't it, Align?
Well, yes, it is, but think of it, again, you got to think of it as gear. All right? Are you going to spend $20 on a dime store sleeping bag that might be good, if you've got four walls and a nice, fireplace? But if you're going to be out in the wilderness, you're going to want to spend $200 or $300 on a sleeping bag that is not going to give you the risk of hypothermia.
That's true.
If you are going to get some sort of loose stools or diarrhea because your intestines are not working well, you're going to run the risk of dehydration, and you're going to run the risk of not being able to finish your trip. Okay. So get the good stuff, because you can count on it.
It's probably worth it, yeah. And funnily enough, I love your last sentence, and I'm going to read it out in full. It says, and whenever you're in a trail town and have access to fresh foods, please make sure you eat your fruits and veg. As opposed, you didn't write this bit, as opposed to the burgers, beers, and pizzas you're really going to eat when you get into town.
Well, that was in as well, but I said, no, I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna be positive, and then you can eat your fruits and vegetables, and then you can have all the other stuff.
Trust me, Linn, I'm just as positive. It's burgers, pizzas, and beers. That's what most people are heading for when they go to town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. That's very helpful. Next week, I'd like us, if we could, to circle back on the discussion we started having with post-trail depression, because we had some really interesting people write in and write about their own experiences. And I certainly gleaned something from those things. And I know you have, because I've sent them to you as well. And if you can get your thoughts in order and I'll get my thoughts in order, we'll just have a conversation again about what we think about this as a result of looking at these responses, okay?
Oh, I think that would be terrific. Looking forward to that.
I look forward to it. That's well, and I'll speak to you next week.
Terrific. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm really going to miss those chats. Lynn put a lot of time and effort into this, so I know that you'd like me to thank her on your behalf. We've got one more chat to have, which is a follow-up after the post-trail depression thing, and then I'm going to wean you off her with her commentary on a short hike that she loves in Connecticut. I've had a few of these short hike stories, but not as many as I'd have liked. However, I've come up with a new segment for the show. With hikers already heading north, I'm looking for the class of 2018 to call me and tell me a short, funny, sad, maybe even revelatory story of something that has happened to them on this year's through hike. In this way, you'll be updating your families and your mates about what's going on and entertaining our listeners with snippets from the trail. I think the best way to do this is for you to send me a quick email to steve@mightyblueontheat.com and pick a time when you might be able to record. Alternatively, you can friend me on Facebook, then message me. I'm often at home, so I may be able to call you pretty much straight away. I'll put my Facebook link in the show notes. Let's see how it goes, shall we? Since I started doing these shows, I've really tried to respond to listeners when they're kind enough to reach out to me. I've been meaning to say this for a few weeks, but those of you who I haven't replied to, it is only because your email slipped through the net. Write again. I'd love to hear from you, and I promise I will write back to you. Next week, all I can say is that I will be speaking with somebody. Once again, my non-nerdiness really knocked me through a loop this week, and I'm catching up. One thing you can be sure of, though, is that by next Thursday at 3 o'clock in the morning, episode number 74 will be available. My show is nothing if not consistent. There's another 5-star review this week from cold_brew45. He or she says, I found this podcast through watching Dixie on YouTube, and after listening to her episodes, I started from the beginning and was immediately hooked. Thanks, cold_brew45. Once again, Dixie gives the show a boost, and she didn't even know about it. What a woman. Don't forget, Trailtopia have signed on to continue their sponsorship of both our current shows, so I hope you'll be supporting them by trying out their scrumptious food. You can find them at trailtopia.com. Lastly, we're on to the first section of Chapter 9 of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer. I've been struck all the way through by similarities in our hikes, but this one took the biscuit. Like me, Earl was bitten by a dog, and like me, the flipping owner wouldn't have it that his dog had bitten me. 70 years have passed, and some things just don't change. I'll see you next week. Chapter 9, Lakes and Jumbled Hills. Crystal lakes on the crest of the range, chance meetings both friendly and dire, stony footing and weatherly change, and the bane of forbidden fire. Most of New Jersey is coastal plain, with level or gently rolling farmlands or pine barrens, but the part next to the Delaware River is definitely mountainous. The Appalachian Trail follows Kittatinny Ridge with the Delaware River Valley and the Poconos to the west. This region was unexpectedly wild and picturesque, with many white-tailed deer and other wildlife. But this was more than 30 years ago. From Portland Bridge, some patches of berries slowed me, but I finally arrived at the base of Tammany Mountain, where a stiff climb on the curving rock ledge took me to the summit. Far below lay the river, winding from the north through the Minisink, with the late afternoon sun lighting the surface, placid except for the V-shaped wake of a small powerboat. Beyond lay the Pocono Mountains, once the beloved homeland of the Lenni Lenape, but now the vacation haunts of countless city dwellers. A 4-lane bridge now spans the river in the gap, eliminating the detour to Portland along with the pastoral view. My camp that night was a few miles north and was one of those impromptu arrangements that turn out right. Rain was beginning to fall, and in my haste to make a shelter before the ground got wet, I slanted a pole in a tree fork and threw the poncho across, then tied 2 other poles to left and right from the peak, forming what really was half a wigwam. Actually, the tree was not necessary, as the 3 poles formed a tripod when tied together. Once again, I had reverted to Indian ways, and this became my standard shelter henceforth. The centre opening was covered with my rain hat. The snorting of deer awoke me in the morning. They had come very close before catching my scent. When I poked out my head, they leapt away and vanished in the woods. The storm was over, the weather after rain, cool and clear with foliage glistening green, a fine time for hiking except for the drenching grass and brush. More deer moved ahead as I came to Sunfish Pond, the first natural lake on the AT going north. From here to Katahdin, lakes are the usual thing. North from Sunfish Pond, the trail was often rough and rocky through scraggly brush, passing Sand Lake and Fairview Lake before coming to the shelter near Harding Lake. I would have stopped, but the place was strewn from here to yonder with numerous bedrolls and other gear, while shrill voices from the direction of the lake, and various unmentionables scattered about, indicated that a group of girls was in residence. One hasty glance was enough to send me off, practically at a lope. Rain began later as I hurried over rocky terrain and finally was forced to stop and try to sleep while huddled under the poncho. No shelter, no supper, no nothing, except definitely misogynistic thoughts. Rain still fell in the morning as I came to brink shelter, but a clear-up wind began to blow and the rain stopped as I reached a point overlooking Culver Lake, then descended to a gap and a grocery store. Since a fire was forbidden in New Jersey, I bought only things that needed no cooking. The next shelter was of stone but had no water supply. At least it was dry and I was able to get some much-needed sleep. At Sunrise Mountain the next day, I met a family group at the Stone Pavilion. The day was Sunday and a road came near. One of the men insisted that at least 5 people had already hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, and he was very provoked when I disagreed. He couldn't seem to realize the difference between hiking the whole trail in several hikes requiring years and hiking it all the way continuously. Actually, 6 people had hiked the trail in a series of hikes. They were Myron Avery, Dr. George Outerbridge, Charles Hazelhurst, Mr. and Mrs. Martin Kilpatrick, and Orville Crowder. At High Point State Park, there were lots of picnic fireplaces, but none was being used and they looked as though they seldom were. At each was a sign reminding that a permit from a ranger for exact time and place was required. The signs did not indicate where or how you could find a ranger. No through hiker could possibly meet such requirements. I rambled on, passing the villages of Unionville and Liberty Corners in New York State, then veering back into New Jersey, mostly on roads. Once a friendly dog about 2.5 feet high and twice as long tried to join the expedition. He tagged along for several miles, despite attempts at friendly persuasion, before I resorted to sticks and stones to turn him back. Dogs either love or hate a person carrying a pack. Hounds are usually the friendliest. Beware of German Shepherds, Chows and similar breeds. Terriers are small but nasty. One came yapping at my heels along a blacktop road. Suddenly, a Chow dashed out from a house and made a leaping grab. I fended him off with my forearm but got a bloody gash. The owner heard the commotion, came around from behind the house, denied the dog had bitten me, and berated me for being on the public highway, and then threatened to call the police. I told him to go ahead and save me the trouble. Meanwhile, the dog crouched wolfishly at his side, and he made no move to punish it. I concluded the dog was not rabid, just vicious like its master, and bandaged the cut myself later. Dark fell as I reached Wonder Mountain, where I slept under a giant hemlock tree near a waterfall. South wind promised rain, but not before morning. It came on schedule, and my feet soon were soaked. While I rested on a bank later, wringing out my socks, a Labrador retriever came up and sat beside me in a friendly fashion until I rose to leave. At least 9 out of 10 dogs are friendly, even to a backpacker, but beware of the others. Later, along a woods road, a man came walking and I waited for him to catch up. He remarked about the trail being relocated because of the nudist camp. This didn't really register until later. The trail crossed overgrown fields and came out where some buildings and a pond were being built. It looked like another dude ranch, not unusual in New Jersey, but apparently wasn't. The people who were there looked at me strangely, probably imagining my appearance without clothes. Later on, I read an AP story about the camp. Still later, another story said the camp had failed because of a mosquito problem. Turning northward, the trail followed a ridge overlooking Greenwood Lake to the east, in the direction of New York City, which would be visible on a clear day. The weather was beginning to clear as the lone expedition crossed into New York State and the Palisades Interstate Park. The little black notebook says, "Sure am glad to be out of New Jersey. That no-fire law has me on the verge of starvation and pneumonia." At the north end of Greenwood Lake, a trail branched down to a village of the same name. The delicatessen was run by an Irish lady who was amazed that anyone actually could have walked all the way from Georgia on the mountains. Yet her eyes twinkled as though she were thinking, yes, and you can be sure that such a one would be looking a wee bit Irish. This wouldn't be far-fetched. My mother was a Gallagher. The lady urged me to try a can of corned beef and cabbage, which actually was in stock. After all, why not? Has it not been estimated that more Irishers live in the New York area than in Erin itself? New York State is stern about fire building, but logically, the penalty for causing a fire is severe, including the cost of fighting the fire and the resulting damage. I repeat, dangerous fires are those built away from water and left smouldering. Drown your fire is a must for woods travellers, and if you must smoke, be careful with discards. I have never smoked and never will. After a few more miles of cruising along, I stopped and slept under hemlock trees near a spring. The corned beef and cabbage was delicious. Next morning at Inspiration Point, the vista was far and fine. The name itself inspired. Jumbled green hills across a wild expanse of forestland where wild birds freely sing, and teeming hordes of new-grown foliage dance upon the blithesome zephyr breeze of spring. The warbling of a wood thrush far below, a flicker calling in staccato tone, the raucous croaking of a fledgling crow waft upward to this lofty ledge of stone. These hills were much the same long years ago, when first the restless-hearted white man came, when life was hard and blood was quick to flow, and those who followed trails were not so tame. As I and such as I who come and gaze in reverie across the mountain maze.